Every cop sees something that they'll never forget. Something that will stick with them for the rest of their life. What I am about to describe to you is that story for me. This is the most disturbing thing I have ever witnessed. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a remote town that I won't name. The department needed new officers, and I was a young father who needed money, so the timing was perfect. Because I was a rookie, they assigned me to the night shift. It ran from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. The guys at the station sometimes teased me about my hours, saying that I always worked the crummiest shifts. I actually didn't mind them. I've always been a night owl. The guys even called me Night Hawk. And honestly, I kind of liked that. Besides busting people for speeding and pulling over the occasional drunk driver, I spent most nights sitting back, listening to podcasts. In a weird way, it was kind of relaxing. After a year in the department, something happened one night that changed everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town and caused major power outages. Torrential downpour flooded most of the major roads. To be in the best position possible when accident reports came in, I parked my cruiser in a parking lot in the middle of town. At 2 a.m., our dispatcher, Claire, radioed in. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male claimed to have been kidnapped. They told her they were held captive inside someone's home. Then the call ended. When she redialed, the caller didn't answer. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details. Based on the address, I was about 10 minutes away, so I was probably the closest officer. I radioed in and told her I'd respond. I also requested backup. Another new officer named Chris chimed in and said he'd be on location in 5. Claire clicked on her radio but hesitated for a few seconds over the static. Then she said that the caller sounded like they were altering their voice in some way, possibly through digital means, to make themselves sound like a child. She used the specific phrase, like a young girl. She concluded that officers should proceed with extreme caution. All of us were pretty close at the station, so we felt nervous for one another during high-risk cases like these. I radioed back and said, 10-4, then drove off to the scene. When I turned into the neighborhood, I saw that every single street lamp was out. The entire block had lost power. That meant would have low visibility into the home we were investigating, which put us in greater danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street, where the house was, and saw that Chris had already beaten me. His cruiser was idling in front of the house. I pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Chris commented on the home's poor condition. I glanced ahead, taking it in for myself. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes blocked out the windows. The roof was dented in several areas and had a ton of missing shingles. It looked completely abandoned. This sent off alarm bells in my head. You can gather a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. I told Chris I'd take the lead. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain, opened our umbrellas, and followed a waterlogged path up to the door. Chris clicked on his flashlight. Whenever a second officer like Chris is present during an investigation, their entire job is to protect the leading officer by monitoring the suspect's body language. If the suspect makes a move on the cop that's interrogating them, they neutralize the threat. Chris made the perfect backup because he was both observant and calm under pressure. This allowed me to focus solely on the suspect's story, and if I was hearing the truth. When we reached the door, I rang the bell. Then we stood there, listening for movement inside. Rain pounded against our backs. After a few seconds, footsteps shuffled up to the door. Then they paused. Whoever was on the other side stood completely still, just waiting. A strange feeling came over me that we were being watched. Slowly, my gaze drifted over to the peephole. As soon as I made eye contact, a distorted shape moved back, like whoever was watching us had pulled their head away. "If you're in there," I said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions. Open up, please." They froze again, as if they were thinking about what to do next. Then the lock started turning. The door creaked open, but only by a foot. From the darkness, a man peeked out of the crack. He looked like he was in his early 30s. He was overweight, balding, and wore thick-brimmed glasses. I took a single look into his eyes and sensed that he was hiding something. I informed him that we'd received a call from his address of someone claiming to have been kidnapped. The man acted confused. He apologized and told us it must have been a pocket dial. I asked him if it was a pocket dial, then how could he explain the voice in the phone call? For a split second, the man averted his gaze, then said that he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he said he lived alone. Then I told him that, for safety reasons, we needed to have a look inside. Not without a warrant, he said. These days, a warrant can be obtained in minutes. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, Claire came back on the radio and told me the judge approved a telephonic warrant and emailed it. We were clear to enter. I showed the warrant to the man. He reluctantly pulled the door open, and I could see that his hands were visibly shaking. I clicked on my own flashlight and stepped inside. Putrid smell immediately hit me. I scanned around to find the source and saw a hallway straight ahead and a room directly to my right. I shined my light into the room and saw what looked like a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes and stacks of dirty dishes were spread across the carpet. Cockroaches crawled all over them. A couch that looked like it was pulled off the side of the road sat at an angle against the wall. This man obviously used this room as his living space. I'd seen these sorts of living conditions in drug cases before. When I turned to look back at the man, he shifted uncomfortably. I made a mental note to check for paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe. Then I stepped toward the hallway. My foot struck something. I looked down. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a pink Barbie doll playhouse that I knew I'd seen before. I thought about it and realized I'd bought this exact set for my daughter last year for Christmas. I asked the man if he had kids. He said, no, but explained to us that sometimes his nieces came over, so he kept a few toys around for them. Chris and I exchanged a look. No mother in their right mind would allow children into this environment. I told him that this was his last chance to tell me if anyone else was in the house. He assured me there wasn't. I started down the hallway and the man followed, saying that nothing was down there. Chris yanked him back by his arm and ordered him to stay put. The hallway had an open room on either side and a closed door at the end, which was probably the basement. I peeked inside the first bedroom. Scanning from right to left, I saw more children's toys and even items like diapers scattered across the floor. In the corner, the dark shape of a person was hunched over. I drew my weapon, only to realize that it was a doll, sagging its head down in a rocking chair. The shock of that visual made my heart pound. I leaned against the door frame and steadied my breathing. Chris asked me what I had seen. Before I could respond, I started studying the doll. It was the largest one I had ever seen, every bit as big as a person, and the man had dressed it in women's clothing. On the bed beside it, ladies' blouses, jeans, and lingerie were folded into neat piles. Each pile was separated by color. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was a pigsty. What was happening in this room felt wrong on many different levels. All clear, I told Chris. I moved further down the hall and glanced into the second bedroom. This one was empty. I reached the final door at the end of the hall, when from behind me the man called and asked if I'd like to see the upstairs instead. I told him, yes, but first I was going to see the basement. The man said again that there was nothing down there. I heard Chris tell the man to stay still, which meant he was probably trying to follow me down the hall. The closer I moved into this part of the house, the more agitated he became. I reached for the handle, twisted the knob, and pushed the door open. It squealed on its hinges. A set of wooden steps descended into a pitch-black room. I shined my light down. I could only see the area that surrounded the landing. It looked equally as messy as the upstairs. From deep inside the room, in an area I couldn't see, something rattled. I told Chris that I heard movement. The man responded instead, apologizing to me and Chris over and over again. Even though it was the last thing I wanted to do, I had no choice. The man was lying to us. Someone was down there. I headed down the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The rattling noise from inside the room grew louder. Behind me, the man repeatedly begged us to stop looking around. I neared the landing and swept my flashlight across stacks of boxes. No one appeared in my line of sight. Across the room, there was another door. The noise was coming from there. I drew my weapon. I commanded whoever was inside to come out slowly with their hands up. Whoever was inside stopped moving. I shouted the same command a second time. The door remained shut. I crossed the room, sliding between boxes and old furniture that blocked the way. My sights were trained on the door. When I stood within several feet, I paused, listening. Whoever was inside also remained perfectly still. My anxiety ticked up with each second. So many things could go wrong in this situation. I moved to the side of the door frame in case they were armed and tried to fire through the door. I reached for the knob, grabbed on, and twisted. Then I swung the door open. I was still hidden to the side of the frame. If anything besides empty hands emerged, I would have to use deadly force. After several agonizing moments, nothing came. I said a quick prayer, then aimed my weapon right into the room. What I saw I can't go into detail on, but basically this is what happened. A man in his mid-40s was being held captive in that basement. He was a father of 3 and a respected member of the community. Months after he went missing, everyone, including his family, assumed he was dead. After 2 years in captivity, he finally got the chance to escape. Earlier in the night, before we arrived, the homeowner brought the victim's dinner down and made the mistake of leaving his phone behind. The victim managed to activate Siri and call 911. When we arrived on scene, the victim had already been confined in a way that prevented him from calling upstairs or making any kind of substantial noise. Then, when I ordered him to come out, he froze in fear, not because he couldn't obey my command, but because he didn't want me to use lethal force, thinking that he was a threat. Once I opened the door and found him, we arrested the homeowner on the spot and took the victim to the hospital for immediate treatment. I feel incredibly lucky that no one was harmed and that we could reunite this man with his family. But the most disturbing detail, which has haunted me every day since, is how my dispatcher described the voice of the man who made the call. Why was he speaking like a child? The only explanation that makes sense is that this man was forced to speak in that young tone of voice for so long that even when he called the station, that's the only way he could communicate. And if he was forced to do that, what else inside that house was he forced to do?